Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. Now, if you have any questions throughout the session, if you're joining us on Zoom, just look at the top of the bottom of your screen, wherever your Zoom controls are. You should see a little button that says Q&A. Click on that and type in your question. I'll get to those at the end. If you're watching on YouTube and it's live, then just leave a question in the chat. Otherwise, you can leave a comment and I'll get to those later as well. So my name is Jason Gabrinas. I'm one of Snap-on's national diagnostic technical trainers. Been in the training department the last 11 years or so, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep with Snap-on, so I had about 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic. Then before that, it was 8 years at Subaru, so worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just became the default diag guy in the shops. I always had the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come onto my. Then before that, a bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. So our topic today is continuing on with our OEM-specific training series we've been doing this year. And tonight's manufacturer is VAG, so Volkswagen Audi Group. We're going to be focusing mainly on Volkswagen and Audi, but we'll mention some of the other manufacturers that are under that umbrella too. Some of them are Europe or outside of North America only. And this is mainly focusing on the North American markets, but a lot of similarities between them. So let's start off, as we always do, with history. And if you know anything about Volkswagen's history, it could be a little contentious if you think about it, because it was founded in 1937, essentially by the Nazi Party in Germany. The original Beetle design, however, was designed by Ferdinand Porsche, which you probably know that name, and that's going to come up a little bit later. It was meant to be in the form an affordable family car, because back then, if you owned a car, you were considered, pretty well off, because they didn't have the real affordable cars over there, like the Model T and such that we had over here. So Volkswagen in German translates to people's car. So it was revived after World War II, because obviously that put a damper on things. But it was revived after World War II by British officer Ivan Hurst, who was stationed over there. Sales of the Beetle did well all the way through the 1960s. I mean, if some places still, there's tons of them on the road. In the 1970s, the Passat, Scirocco, Golf, and the Polo were introduced, and that helped revitalize the product line. Because up until then, it was mainly Beetles or Beetle adjacent cars like the Carmen Ghia and stuff like that, up until the 70s, where they kind of came more into, I guess, a more modern vehicle. I don't know if I'd necessarily qualify it as modern, but more like the ones we have today, right? So they went and acquired companies throughout their lifetime too. So acquired Audi in 1964. They actually acquired Lamborghini in 1998. They were part stakeholders in Porsche up until 2012, where they fully acquired Porsche at that point. And Volkswagen Group worldwide currently owns Volkswagen, Audi, Lamborghini, Porsche, Bentley, Seat, Skoda, Cupra, and Ducati motorcycles. They also own numerous heavy truck brands such as MAN, Navistar International, and Scania. So a lot of those, as you may recognize, that's over European side of things, like the Seat and the Skoda and the Cupra, and MAN and Scania over there. So they're a very large group as far as what they own and what brands they own. Right? Now, as far as sales, we're going to see that here in a second. Right? So go to our top models. And I plugged in for a filter on this Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche. I just kind of wanted to see if Porsche, for one thing, even showed up on the list, and then where it would fall in relation to other models in the brand. Now, as of course we are going along, this is our second European brand we're talking about, and sales are much less than you would have expected for, say, like Ford and GM, which we also talked. So Jetta, by a large margin, is the number one seller over the last 10 years or so for Volkswagen, Audi. And then the top Audi there is 613,000 units of the Q5. So that's about 60,000 a year. But then you see, once we get past the Atlas, it drops off pretty quick. That's almost half of what the Atlas is, right? And then slowly down further till we get to the first Porsche on the list. a little over 200,000 units sold over 10 years, right? So the Porsche Macan, and then we have a Cayenne down there as well. So they did show up on the list. I do find it interesting that the Jetta is number one, and you don't see like the Golf on there or anything, or the Passat. Yeah, Passat's not on here either. So obviously Audi has a little bit more sales clout, I guess, than just plain Volkswagen. But Volkswagen's the number one overall out of the group, so a little over 1 million sold. So over those 10 years, the high water mark for the Jetta, because that is the number one car, so of course we got to pick one of those. The high water mark at the Jetta was 2014. So it's been slowly trailing down again after that, because a lot more folks seem to be going towards SUVs, right? So, and then, like I said, this is North American sales numbers, so that just kind of plays out in that. So for the 2014 Jetta, it is the 6th generation of the Jetta. They offered this year a 1.4 liter hybrid, a 1.8 liter, a 2 liter, and a 2.5 liter gas engine, as well as a 2 liter diesel engine. Offered in 5-speed, 6-speed manual transmissions and 6-speed DSG automatic transmissions. So that is the manual automatic, I guess you want to say, right? The dual clutch. Also, one thing kind of unique to Volkswagen and Audi over here, anyways, is they're one of the few companies that does the small diesels over here. Not so much anymore, but for a long time, it was really one of the only manufacturers you could get a small little 4-cylinder diesel over here, and as well as many options for sticks still, manual transmission. So you don't see that as much anymore either. So that's our 2014 Jetta. Top Audi was the Q5, and the top year for the Q5 was 2018. So that was the 2nd generation of Q5. The only offering for that year was a 2-liter gas engine. I guess there is a 3-liter engine available as well. 7-speed DCT automatic transmission was the only one available on that as well. So that's a dual clutch automatic as well. And then I wanted to throw a Porsche on there. We're not really talking too much about Porsche in this particular class. I think we're going to talk about it on their own when we get to that point. But since it is under the group, I figured I'd at least mention it. So the 2019 Macan was the I think I'm pronouncing that right, was the high water mark for that. It was in the 1st generation. It was launched in 2014, and in 2019 model year, that was the 2nd refresh that it had gotten since 2014. It's offered with a 2-liter turbo and a 3-liter turbo gas engine, automatic DCT transmission. I would imagine pretty much the same as the Q5. And gasoline particulate filter is standard this year as well. So those have started coming in, becoming more of a thing. The gasoline particulate filter is going to do very much what the diesel particulate filters did on the diesels, just does it on a gasoline engine now instead. So there's a lot more of them over in Europe right now, but they are making their way over to the States as well. Some common issues that come up as we go through, the data and repair orders and all the information that we have. What is common amongst these is many occurrences of misfires, and we'll talk more about like coils and such. EVAP issues, which I think that's just fairly common across the board on any manufacturer. I don't really recall any manufacturers we've gone through so far not having EVAP issues, just because they're kind of a pain to diagnose, and it can just be a teeny leaks all it takes. A lot of map sensor and mass airflow codes. So I thought that kind of jumped out at me. And then timing chain issues on some engines as well, between just the timing chain itself and the components as well. Some common codes that we see, and this is gonna play out to that last slide there, right? So first 2 top codes on Volkswagen, 2012 Jetta, 2012 Passat, both using the same engine. 00262 code, and that is manifold pressure sensor implausible signal. So that's a map sensor code. And then if we go down a little further, boost pressure regulation, that's related, but the turbo. EGR, boost pressure regulation again. Cam position sensor, engine oil pressure, input circuit. So that's the only U code there, and that's pretty high up the list actually. Another thing you will notice with the Volkswagen codes, that can be presented in multiple ways. They do both like a hex format, and they also have the P codes in there as well. So in this case, that'd be a U3501 subcode 0, P06DA subcode 0. It just doesn't show the dash in there for some reason, but I think that might be Excel doing that. But yeah, they do present themselves in a different way. So if you look it up, you can look it up either way. You can look it up as the P code or as the 00262 would also come up, and then it would just cross to a P code in that case. But yeah, a lot of these, like I said, map sensor problems on the first two. OEM specific features. So what makes these cars unique? And I will say, at least through my research, that they're pretty reliable. They when they break in kind of certain ways, specific ways, and they don't really have anything terribly out of the ordinary on the engine. If you remember back when we did BMW, all this different, variable valve timing, variable valve lifts, and with all these motors and variable intakes and all that. These don't have the fancy stuff on there. But the one thing that I guess they do, but it's not specific to them. They use kind of a base system. But one thing that they do that nobody else really does is their VR engines. So we got the VR6, which is instead of having a 45-degree block, it's down to I think it's 10 or 15 degrees, if I recall. So you're able to fit a 6-cylinder engine into the space of roughly a 4-cylinder engine. See, so this is the top layout of the VR6. Now, one other thing that I'd like to note about these V, and we're going to talk about W engines here in a second, is this is the front of the engine and the timing's all in the back. So that's another thing to be aware of. If you've never worked on one of these before and you're looking for the timing chain, well, don't look in the front because it's going to be in the back. All the other belts and such are on the front. Actually, I think as a consequence of that, might make it a little easier to access the timing, which is nice. Because if they have timing problems, well, you're going to want maybe a little easier. You don't have to take off all the pulleys. Then they also have a W8 engine, which is would be like a VR4 almost that they don't have. They don't have a VR4, but it'd be like two of those together so they call that a W formation because it's two V's really. So W8 engine, they use that on a few of the higher end cars. And then there's also a W12 that is out there. So that is basically two VR6s sandwiched together like that. So that is kind of unique when it comes to, like I said, when it comes to the Volkswagen Audi group as a whole. They have these odd kind of shaped up engines. So kind of an interesting idea, interesting thought. Might make some difficulties with how to repair them, but another thing that's kind of unique to them is they do on some of the, especially like the older models, like the early and mid 2000s down into the 90s, they wouldn't have a specific actuator test for an actuator. Like I couldn't turn an injector on and off. I couldn't turn the cooling fan on or off. I would have to wait till it gets through this whole sequence. So I would activate each of these actuators for 30 seconds. So the scan tool sequentially activates each of the actuators for 30 seconds, and then it just goes down the list. Now you can go forward on the list to go through each one until you get there, but it only activates it for 30 seconds. So I thought that was kind of an interesting that's definitely different than how most manufacturers do it. And then in order to reinitiate the test, the vehicle actually has to be cycled. The ignition has to be cycled as well. Start the engine, turn the engine off, and turn the ignition switch on again. Now, this is right out of our software manual for Volkswagen, because I know I get a lot of questions about not just Volkswagen in general, but more like expert mode, which there actually is a section in the manual about expert mode as well. So now for tips from a tech. So this is our real life experience. Hey, this thing that I've noticed a lot that maybe necessarily the manufacturer didn't pick up on. And this is one of the goals of these classes is if you don't work on these very often, or you've never worked on one of these and one of them rolls into your shop and it has this weird problem, you probably want to know that before pulling your hair out and trying to figure out, what is the solution to this problem when other techs have already seen it, right? So one thing is coil-related misfires. So when they have a misfire, which we did see there was a fair amount, if it is the coil causing the problem, it can be a little challenging to diagnose the fact that it is the coil because They tend to not fail at idle and not fail at a higher speed. Like if you did like a 2,000 RPM test or even cruising down the road, they're going to fail under a load. So you'd have to put it under some sort of a load, either doing like an engine brake or something like that, to put them under a load to get them to fail. So that they wouldn't really fail at an idle, they wouldn't really fail at cruise, they would just fail under a load. So it could make it a little more challenging to diagnose. Also, I found tons and tons, and there's actually a class action lawsuit against Volkswagen on their sunroof drain. Now, it's not necessarily the top part that we'd necessarily be worried about when it comes to like electrical diagnostics, but the bottom part, down the bottom by the floor, has a tendency to pop out or whatever. And then if my sunroof drain is now popped out of its hole and it's sitting on the floor or very close to the floor, above the floor, there's a lot of wires, splices, a bunch of things underneath the carpet that can get damaged, wet, that sort of thing, and cause electrical problems on the vehicle or other sorts of issues on it with that. So just be aware that if you have a weird electrical gremlin, pull the carpet and see if it's wet. And then that might be a good indicator because the customer might not necessarily recognize that they have a problem. But if you have one of those problems, get a bunch of green fuzzy stuff all over a splice, and there you go. Now you have a problem. And it could even, obviously take place over time too. Water can dry up and then have a phantom problem a couple weeks, a month later. Also, another thing that's, I don't know if it's necessarily unique to them, but this was a really good tip that the tech told me. So this is Sean Shaw, actually one of our diagnostic reps, gave me a lot of these information here. So for special tools, if I want to find a special tool, Snap-on actually manages the special tool program for Volkswagen and Audi. So if you wanted to go check those out, you can't order through the site because you have to be a dealer, but you can look up part numbers and rough retail price on it and pictures, so you know what it is. So if you go through one of the flow charts and it says you need XYZ special tool, you can go look it up here, see what it looks like, and then talk to your local Volkswagen dealer, and you can get it that way. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting little side note because they have a lot of special tools that they require. Also, on some of these, they have dual batteries. So they have a 12-volt battery, and then they also have a 48-volt mild hybrid system on some of the newer ones as well, like the A8s. I took these diagrams off an A8. So it has the 48-volt battery in the back, and then it also has a starter generator unit. So that is for the works very similarly to some other brands that I've spoken about before in the 48-volt mild hybrid class, that it's used to start the vehicle in the start-stop condition. So if I come to the light and the engine shuts off, it'll use this to start it up instead of just the starter. So if you're diagnosing a starting problem, a start-stop problem, that may be your cause right there instead of actually the actual starter itself. May not be the problem. Now let's get into some scan tool, OEM specific scan tool related functions. So first off, the engine related tests. So the sequential actuator test, like I said, so you go in there and you would just say, okay, do the actuator test, and then it puts a little timer on the screen and it would go through and cycle through them individually. Lots and lots and lots of ECU coding in there, and it can get kind of complicated doing it. If you know what you're doing, it's very powerful. If you're not sure what you're doing, you could break some stuff. So you just want to be aware of that when it comes to coding. Some of the coding actually we've simplified as well, and I think I have an example that I can show you on one of these cars. We actually go in and you can choose from a list of items instead of actually typing in a code, which is nice. Expert mode as well. So expert mode is going to basically work like the factory tool in most cases, where you can do long coding and adaptations and all this other stuff, security access, special procedures, basic settings, measured value blocks as well. And that's my next bullet point, right? Is value blocks versus data stream. So on the factory tool, the way it reads data, or at least the way it used to read data, I'm not sure if they've made any updates to it recently, but it would be in blocks of 4 data. So you'd have to know what value block you're looking for, punch that in, and then it would pull back the 4 PIDs that are in that value block. Versus what we've done over the last 8-10 years or so is we brought a lot of that data over into the OEM specific scanner side, and you can just go into the scanner, go into the engine, and just pull up all the PIDs all at once and not have to worry about those measured values blocks. So this is actually a screenshot off of expert mode. So this is some of the examples of things you could do in expert. And as far as expert mode is concerned, this is out of the manual as well. And this is basically what we cover on expert mode. By and large, you'll see it gets up to like the mid 2000s. On some of the newer vehicles, you still can, but it's not necessarily called out specifically, and your mileage may vary. On anything newer than 05, I would probably try to stick to just the factory, the scanner side, and just do it that way, because a lot of that stuff did get brought over as well. There's some things you might have to go in there to do, but if you know what you're doing, then it can be pretty powerful. As far as transmission's concerned, ECU coding, once again, like I said, coding's pretty big across Volkswagen and Audi as rule. Just so you can change functions and features in the vehicle just by typing in a code or choosing from a list of presets. And there's also an adaptation drive, which I think was that's a good time saver. So an adaptation makes sense under the following circumstances. Adaptation takes place automatically in the next drive cycle, unnoticed by the customer. And print out the attached function description relating to the adaptation drive. You have to do it after an ATF change or repairs the clutches. It takes place automatically in the next drive cycle, unnoticed by the customer. And then you would just hit continue, and it would bring you into this mode. And then it would run the adaptation on the next drive cycle. Customer doesn't even realize. And it just needs to be done to adapt the transmission. Also, some other tests that are in there that kind of came up that I thought would be pertinent. Parking brake replacement. So if I have to do a parking brake pad change, you have to go in there and do it a certain way. There's two different functions to do. And there's also a brake air gap calibration. So after I replace my parking brake pads, I need to make sure I have the right air gap in there. So there's actually a calibration for that in the brakes. And also battery registration. Pretty much anytime you replace a battery on a lot of European cars, Volkswagen is one of them, you need to register with the car that you've replaced the battery, so it knows how to adapt the charging system. All right, so that's our specific stuff. Let's get into our specific vehicles that we chose and see what we got on the scan tool here. All right, so first one, just go into the scanner. And let's go into actually going to Volkswagen, and then we can do from in the US market or the North America market. We can access US vehicles, European vehicles, and then expert mode. So European vehicles was added mainly for Canada because they have a lot of crossover in Canada with European market vehicles over there. So you can actually access those. And then expert mode, like I said, is basically like using the factory tool, can easily be disabled or disrupted by doing that. And then you can just see the different things we can go into. And Volkswagen also numbers all their modules. So that's why you'll always see the numbers there. But Engine Management Master, for example, it doesn't have 16-pin OBD, yes. You can auto detect or manually select the protocol going this way. And you see the different protocols that are there. So UDS would be like the newest one. And then you need to do stop communication as well. It's going to give me some information on the ECU, and then you can go in and do what you need to do. So adaptations, line adaptations, security access, special procedures, long coding, basic settings, and so on. So if you know what you're doing and you know what you need to do in that case, you can go in there and do it. All right, so let's pop into the Jetta first. And we'll look at a few things here. Also on Volkswagen and Audi vehicles, it does interrogates the vehicle for a fitted systems. So if it has it, it shows up. If it doesn't have it, it takes it off the list. Or you can just hit exit to just do a generic full list, which may or may not have everything on the car. So in this case, we'll go into engine management. It's telling me it's in simulator, and then because it's the simulator, I still have to pick. And in that case, it's codes and data. And then we'll just pick the engine. So, data. If I go into data, I can look at, a good chunk of data. It's not just four out of whack like I'd have to in expert. Functional tests is going to be your actuator test is going to be that sequential actuator test I talked about. It's going to go through and it's going to actuate each of those actuators in sequence for 30 seconds apiece. Special functions in there, you can actually do the coding in here as well. So you can read the current coding, input a new coding, and go into the configuration list. So you can actually go in there and edit that as well. So in this case, this is front axles, rear axles, tire pressure monitor, that sort of thing. And then adaptations. It's going to clear and change system settings and can disable systems. So you need to be careful about that. And then in this case, you would need to know what channel number you need to go in. And like I said, that's like an expert mode function that you would need to do. So you would need to know what channel it is. So I'm just going to pick 120. Don't even know what that one is off the top of my head. Hit OK, and it's going to pull up. There's my blocks, and then I can change my adaptations. So like I said, if you know what you're doing, you can read the manual. The software manual for Volkswagen has a lot of this in there. Or another good resource I'm going to say is Rostech's wiki online. So Rostech makes a Volkswagen tool as well, and they have a really thorough wiki with all those different settings and channel numbers and things. So you could just, it's a free resource. It's online. So let's see. So that is helpful as well, especially with expert mode. Let's see, brake electronics. This is more of the ABS than anything. And in that case, you can do some basic settings and data as well. Let's go to the parking brake real quick, because that's the one park brake. And we'll just choose the parking brake, and there's functional tests in there, special functions. Parking brake test, steering angle calibration is actually in the parking brake, not in the steering. And rear brake pad replacement procedures in there as well. So it'll be able to walk you through that. So now let's look at some Suretrack information on this. And as we saw, 1 million sales over. So I got to log myself out. Been in here a lot today. All right. So out of 1 million sold over 10 years of 2014 with a 2.5 liters, got 149,189 repair records on them. So we can see what the top components, which pads and rotors, as you would expect, wheels, spark plugs. Headlight bulb seems a little high. AC refrigerant seems a little higher than you would expect as well. So maybe, oh wait, number 3 symptom, AC and op. So maybe we have some AC issues with that. Noise heard from brakes, headlights in op. There's that number 1 code, manifold absolute pressure code. Random misfire again, evap. Misfire, cam position. So a lot of misfire stuff. Map sensor, number 1, like I said. Number 1, lookup, timing belt, cabin air filter. So let's just plug in this map sensor real quick and see what it comes up with. Oh, gotta pick the engine code. That's another thing, is there's a ton of engine variants when it comes to Volkswagen. It could still be a 2-liter, and it could be a 2-liter gas engine, but it could be 15 different variants of it. So you need to be aware of that as well. There's an engine tag where you can find that. Let's see if there's any what the TSBs are. 106 and 3078 stored in the fault memory. That applies to a lot of vehicles. In this case, it may be due to a carbon buildup on the throttle valve. There we go. Could be a lot of carbon on the throttle valve right there, and that could be causing code as well. So it's not necessarily the map sensor. It could very well be carbon buildup on that. All right, there's our Volkswagen, and let's look at our Audi Q5. It's going to have a lot of the same scanner functions in there, so I don't think I really actually need to go in there. It's going to make me go through this thing though. Okay. But let's look at the Suretrack. Now, remember, like I said, this was the top selling Audi, but it's not really that close to the number of sales. So 7,900 repairs on this, and that's the only engine available on this. So if we go to engine, yeah, 2-liter engine is the only one. So pads, rotors, spark plugs, nothing really out of the ordinary. I don't think, maybe TPMS, but that's 350, so that's not terribly high. Water pump, that's fair amount. Coolant leak, number one issue there, so that kind of stands to reason, I guess. And OOB7, coolant flow low and performance. So there you go, coolant problem. And then POOB700 is the symptom code version of this. So those top two is going to be coolant flow. And then it comes down to the 2s and 3s and 5s pretty quick. So, you know, a couple misfires and things like that. Really not that big a thing. And then lastly, we're going to go through the Porsche just to see. Like I said, we're probably going to take a little bit deeper dive a little bit later in the year into Porsche proper. But this is actually built off of the same platform as the Q5. So it's going to have a lot of similarities. But you see, since we know there's not a ton of sales, not a ton of repairs either. So we don't even have top DTCs because there's only 600 repairs on that engine. And then if I go into the 3-liter, I think it's even less. Let's see. Yeah, 265 repairs. So there's not a ton of failure records that we have on these. So you're going to see same things like pads and rotors and spark plugs and stuff. As far as top codes, you know, we don't have that analytics right now, just because there's not a ton of them on the road, so not a ton of them need to be repaired. So that is Volkswagen Audi. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about next week. So next week's topic is cam and crank correlation. I get asked a lot about cam crank correlation. How do I do a cam crank correlation test? How do I test it with a scope? What does it mean when it goes this way? What does it mean when it goes that way? And so on. So we'll dive into all of that and talk about how we would set up our scope to capture that. And we know what it means when I see this, this, and this. So, you know, that's what we're going to cover next week. Cam and crank correlation and why it's necessary and why, you know, tons of people need it. And we'll talk about it. Want to see anything else? Oh, yeah, by the way, yeah, we're going to talk about it. And it's also at 6 and 9 Eastern every Tuesday. I've got to make sure I mention that. If you want to go on Zoom, just make sure you're registered at snapon.com/OT and register for whatever class you need. I do both of them on Zoom. The first class, 6 p.m., goes live to YouTube like I'm doing right now. So it's youtube.com/Snap-on Diagnostics. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure you like and subscribe and all that. And then the 9 p.m. Eastern class goes live to my Facebook page. So it's facebook.com/SnapOnJason, all one word, no dash in Snap-on. And that'll bring you there. Also, if you want a certificate for taking the training, you can go to the Zoom class. If you register in the Zoom class, you will get a certificate emailed out pretty much the next day, as far as I'm aware. And if you want to see any of our other past classes in this series, from Intro to ADAS to Modern ABS Systems, Diagnosis and Repair, and everything in between, and funny enough, those two are quite related at this point. This is actually episode 88 today. So, yeah, it's all available up there for free. All half-hour, 40-minute type classes. You can take, you know, any of those, and you can still ask questions on them too, because I do check the comments from time to time. So if a question pops up, you can always do that. The easiest way to contact me, if you do want to, is probably my Facebook page. Honestly, just send me a message in Messenger, and then it'll come to my phone. So if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, you just click on that or scan that QR code, and it'll bring you over there and subscribe you. Now it's time for questions. Looks like I got one on Zoom. If you did join late on Zoom and you didn't hear where to put your question, there is a Q&A button somewhere, top or bottom of your screen, that you should be able to see. You can type in your question there. If you're watching on YouTube, just make sure to leave a comment and or the chat. But before I get to those, I want to mention my buddy Keith as well, who does free training on scan tool specific training on this one. So it's 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central, 4:30 Pacific. Only one time that day because they're about an hour and a half or so. Wednesday is on Zeus and Zeus Plus. Thursday is going to be on Apollo and Triton. And it takes you everything pretty much soup to nuts, from setting up the Wi-Fi through what is Fast Track Intelligent Diagnostics and how does it help me, all the way through. That's about the first hour. And then he goes through, takes a 5-minute break, and then goes through the scope and meter functions, you know, towards the on the back half of that. So it's about an hour and 45 minutes, give or take, maybe 2 hours. It kind of depends. So if you want to register for those are Zoom only. So snapon.com/OT on that. All right, as far as questions, let's see. We got one on Zoom. Richard McKellen says, it's an education on Volkswagen or the tool. It's kind of both, right? How does Volkswagen do things uniquely that they do? And it's those tips from the tech, I think, are really the big value. And then, of course, a couple of the things on the tool. And actually, yeah, you asked that way early. So hopefully throughout the course of the evening, I answered your question with that. So thank you, Richard. All right. And then on YouTube, Nick says hello from the UK. Yeah, sorry we're not specific to UK on this, but hey, it's a lot of this will transfer over. He also said that Ferdinand Porsche once worked for Mercedes-Benz, but was not happy. So there you go. So now he got bought out by Volkswagen eventually, but they worked together for a while. And then JLE Lobo says Snap-on's really getting on top of the game with all this diagnostics info. Great session. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know I try my hardest to make this as universal as I can, but of course, I know who signs my paycheck too, so I have to talk about, of course, Snap-on specific stuff. I'm not going to use a different scan tool in here, but I try to answer the questions for you as best I can, and then try to give you as much content as I can in half an hour, just to try and help everybody out. Because I remember being a tech, and if a weird off-brand car would come in, and I didn't really know much about it, it would take me a whole lot longer to diagnose it and figure it out. And sometimes it was just like that, one of those stupid, obvious things that in hindsight it was obvious, but at the time, you don't know. So having this information, trying to get this out there, doing the research that I do, I appreciate that you appreciate it, and I thank you very much for bringing that up. Always learning something new. Thank you very much. So and Nick says thanks, Snap-on, as well. So I appreciate that. It is a lot of work to get these done, so I definitely appreciate that folks are here, and we are pretty packed in Zoom tonight too, which is awesome. Kept seeing people pop in as we were starting. That's great. We had over 40 people in here at the high point, so that was wonderful. And Jaylee Lobo also says, let's celebrate when it reaches the number 100 session. That will be towards the end of the year. I just don't know what we're going to do. Well, you're going to have to think about it. I was thinking, I'll just do a clip show or something like that, right? But I don't know what we're going to do. We'll have to figure it out. Hopefully, we're definitely not going to hit 100,000 subscribers by the time we get 100. That'd be really nice if we did. That'd be awesome if we did. But I think we got a little bit of time to think about it. It's going to be towards the end of the year, probably November, December timeframe. I haven't figured it out yet. I know it's probably going to be November, December. With that, though, that is all the questions. So my PowerPoint will work. There we go. All right. Thank you very much for taking a little bit of time out of your day, spending a little bit of time with me. Hopefully we got a couple little tips and tricks, little tidbits out of Volkswagen. And hopefully you'll come back next week for crank and cam sensor correlation, because I know that's usually a pretty hot topic. So hopefully you'll check that out, and we'll learn a little bit about that as well. So with that, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a nice night, and take care.